Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets get coy with their plans for one Cam Johnson. We ask how obsessed with future assets we should be as a Nets fan base, and I comb my hair. It's all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. Now is the perfect time to join. Download the app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And Doug, where we'll start running our game is this little adventure that we're going on with Cam Johnson. As the February 6th trade deadline looms, the Nets, we assumed, probably would have moved him already, but they've also been absolutely terrible when they've been playing. So should we put any stock in some of the buzz that the Brooklyn Nets are saying, maybe we keep Cam Johnson? We don't need to trade him if we don't get the proposed at least 2 first-round picks that we're after.
I don't think it's all posturing. I think that Marks has shown in the past that he is willing to hold the line here. So I think the part where it's like, oh, he's just posturing. There's enough evidence in the past that he has not done deals, it seems, when he just didn't feel like they were getting the right amount of value back, right. And they've just kept the guy. And there's been times where he's extracted max value and he's held the line, and he got the most you could ever get probably for KD, and he got the most for by far you'd ever get for McHale. And so then that just only goes to like prove positive that maybe holding the line sometimes is right. Now, he seems like he's held the line on worse players in the past and then not gotten anything. Yeah. So I think it's not all just posturing. I think there is probably at least some chance that they're being honest, that they're like, and that, by the way, which is the only real way to negotiate. The only way you can really actually negotiate with someone if they feel like what you're saying, like your worst possible scenario would come true. Like that's real negotiation. Because otherwise, if no one believes it, then whatever. So I think I think there's a little bit of fire where that smoke is. What do you think? That's my guess is it's not just all, random reporting to get leverage. I think there is probably a higher percentage of Nets fans want to think that they would keep him through the deadline.
Yeah, that the last line right there, right? Higher percentage than you would want it to be, or than you would think it would be, right? Because to your point, now it's happened with Dorian Finney-Smith in the past, or it's happened with players that did not have nearly the same value that Cam Johnson has had building towards this trade deadline. But the funny part about, what was it, last week when Sean Marks comes out and basically says, hey, we're going to be strategic, and it's not always going to be about winning on the court. Well, yeah, that's about trades and who plays or doesn't play and minute restrictions. But it's also, I think, a reminder that if they're willing to, Sean Marks is willing to look at it and say, well, we understand. We got big drafts coming up. We have big decisions to make. We want to rebuild this roster. But you've also heard the rumors that they're willing to be in on Giannis if that comes to pass, that one off season he wants out of Milwaukee. Okay, well, if all of a sudden, let's just say this off season, Giannis is disgruntled, he wants out. Well, there'd be worse things in the world than either one of two things: having more contracts on the books that you can send out the door, like always good to have that option, or secondarily, hey, Giannis, you're looking at Brooklyn as a landing spot. Guess what? Cam Johnson's phenomenal. He'd be a great player to have on the floor with you. These are how the pieces fit around you. So there is a little bit, I think, of threading the needle if you're Sean Marks. And Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas probably falls into this category too, but those might be the only 2 players on this roster where if you're thinking within the next year and a half, you may go star hunting again, these are a couple of guys that would actually be attractive rather than having to go and compile your entire roster on the market, right? So that's where the percentage, I think, does lie heavily of maybe there's another move we end up making in the last 2 years of Cam Johnson's deal become valuable for where we are at that point. And that includes drafting a young talent in the top 5, we think, maybe in the upcoming draft.
Yeah, that's exactly the story. It's like you have to tell yourself different stories, and that's why you say probabilistically, like, is it 100% chance that they trade him? No way. There's no way, because once you outline a scenario where it kind of makes sense to keep him, at least for top decision maker stories. Maybe you out there listening don't think it makes sense for them to keep him. That's fine. I'm saying, but your opinion doesn't really matter for anything, right? So you only have to put your head in the minds of the top decision makers here. And if the top decision maker can tell themselves a story where, oh, if we keep him, and like it's Giannis plus I'm just using your example, Giannis plus Cam Johnson plus someone else that we pick up because now it's a super attractive free agent destination to someone who's on like their third contract.
And we land Dylan Harper in the draft as well, right? Like all of a sudden,
and we land a top 5 pick.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like in the summer of 26 after the draft, right? And something like that. And so now they have, Dylan Harper plus whoever comes, Boozer, one of the Boozer guys that comes out in the draft next year or something. I mean, there's ways that we talked about it. And we talked about it too. Like the other story you can tell yourself probably if you're Marks is that there is some there's some inherent value to having just a good veteran locker room guy on your team for a team that's kind of just have a lot of different parts moving in and out and going to have a bunch of draft picks, and having a guy that kind of is a professional along those lines has some monetary value. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure if front office have ever pegged it, but it for sure has some value. And so I don't know, I guess rounding back to the beginning, when the question is, would they keep him? Yes, they would keep him. There's a world where they get through the trade deadline here and he's still on the team. Percentage, if I had to I'm always bearish with this stuff. So, and everyone thinks I'm wrong, but I would say there's like 20-25% chance he's on the team through the deadline. What's that?
I don't think that's unreasonable. Like I think that first of all, to sit here and say there's probably a 5% chance. Well, what then you think he's going to get traded, right? Like it has to be something where you realistically think that when you send out this signal to other teams, it probably scares off X percentage. And it's one of the funny parts about this, because we can extend this through the next segment, because I want to talk a little bit about D'Angelo Russell here. And you mentioned about keeping veteran or experienced players around, and the idea that while we've had discussions about what trade packages make sense and players that would really fit here, there's been different narratives coming out from other teams. When we talk to other hosts on the Locked On Network, they talk about a specific group of players being available that don't include Nicola, when you're talking about OKC and wanting that, or that don't include the third first-round pick or the multiple twos, right? So once you start to see that there's a gap in what teams maybe are bringing to the table, that's the first step when you go, maybe it is 20-25% chance that Sean Marks does not get the deal that he wants, and he doesn't feel like I need to make this move with Cam Johnson, especially when you see some of the results on the court. So on the other side here, I have a question about D'Angelo Russell, connects back to last week's discussion around the trade market with him as well. Plus, we'll take a look at how obsessed should we be with all of these picks that are coming in for Brooklyn. We'll do that here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, for the first whistle of the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers give it $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app's easy to navigate. They got a ton of variety of bets here. I mean, they got live in-game stuff. You have more props than you could ever even wade through on a football Sunday. Forget about basketball, too. It's every single day of the week. When you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team, just looking to add some extra excitement during the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. And just swap it over to NBA real quick here. Knicks -11 going into Barclays. Dark days here in Brooklyn. Not the crosstown Knicks -11 on the Nets home court. Could be a Knicks home game with the way the crowd ends up breaking down. Just go make yourself feel better by going over to FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com. Join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we move along in today's Locked On Nets episode, before we get into, I have this question about D'Angelo Russell that I think you and I will be on very different sides of potentially. But on Cam Johnson, closing thoughts around where things stand for you when it comes to what's going to happen as we head towards the deadline.
Yeah, I just want to bump up. I just want to quickly explain the percentage belief, why the percentage should be higher than most people want it to be. And I'll take 2 seconds to do it. But if you do use Bayesian economics, it's you examine your priors, and your priors have to inform sort of what you've done in the past, what's happened in the past.
Yep.
And then help that should inform, and you can change it based on updated information. But here's the thing: the updated information would only reinforce the priors, where Marks is able to hang on to these guys, right? And so if you have this history of being irrational, maybe around what you should have gotten in picks, Dorian Finney-Smith, a good example, should have traded him last year, didn't, got less than they probably could have gotten, or something like that, right? Or and so all you have to do is examine what's happened in the past to then setting a reasonable expectation. And if Marks has done this, 1 out of every 4 times he holds on too long. I mean, is that realistic? Is that like a fair number? Like 1 out of every 4 times he's held on too long. Well, that's 25%. Right. So like that's and so like it doesn't take much to like actually come up with the math here. And then you get news that they might be willing to it. And it's like, well, now we got to bump it up to like 30% because now they've kind of signaled that they're willing to do it. So I'm just trying to like clarify where that number comes from.
And by the way, it's like you can use some other examples here too. The trade with Philadelphia that landed on Ben Simmons when they moved on from James Harden. Well, that'd be an example where, like now it's different. It's different mechanics because you're talking about wanting to win a championship and having Kevin Durant and having Kyrie Irving. But it was, like he's not gonna play for us. We got to make a decision. So you make a snap call. And in reflection, you'd say didn't work out the best, right?
But at the time, you got an All NBA player. Like, the difference.
Well, no. I don't even. Yes, and you're in the end, like in the moment, you are getting value at the time. But my point being there is that decision was kind of inspired, I would say, by a little bit of panic and we got to hustle and make a call here. Whereas you can look at the Kevin Durant trade, that was he waited. Kevin Durant said, maybe I want out. He goes, okay, maybe, but let's just see what happens. And he held. And then when he made the move, you go and you make that deal with Phoenix. Even at the time of that, everyone said, well, pass through Mikal Bridges, pass through Cam Johnson. Let's just get whatever you can now. Let's start the rebuild in this moment. But you hold on to it. Now you're also selling the idea that you want to be competitive and you think that you can continue to build something. But guess what? By holding that line a little bit, even though the Mikal Bridges season didn't look as strong as we thought it would, still ended up getting insane value. Because why? This team in the New York Knicks showed up that had players with connections that felt like they were in the window and the picks didn't matter to them. So the patience part of Sean Marks, I think in the end, on some low levels, it hasn't worked out. On some high levels, though, on the big swings, his patience probably has paid off in really big ways recently.
Well, you can, so that's a great point because you can actually say that in the aggregate, it's worked out. Because you could say well, there's a few lower level deals that didn't work out, but there's some world where not going through these lower level deals signals to everyone else that this guy's just not going to do it unless you come with the full bag, right? Like, and so if you think that like not going,
and the Kyrie deal, by the way, just real quick, that one was there was probably a spitefulness there around that decision and that process that you didn't get the max value you probably could have for him. Or
I don't even put that one in the group,
by the way, right? And that's
I don't even put that one in the group because that had things to do beyond just what was happening on the court and his on-court value. It had so many other problems to it that that's not even like you can't even frame that in like a value around an NBA trade because there was just so many other things happening that no other team was going to take him. He had to be out of there. They couldn't play him and whatever. But everyone else, like you could say, well, yeah, he didn't get, I'll go back and argue against myself here. Okay, well, he didn't get enough for Dorian Finney-Smith. Okay, that's true. But there's, again, you could say, well, other GMs knowing that he's just going to hold on through the deadline and not make a deal might incentivize them to add a little extra something to the pot because they know he just won't do it. Like they just know he won't do it. Like the buzzer will sound and the guy will still be on his team and everyone. So,
go, yeah.
But honestly, when it comes to negotiations, that's kind of the best way to be, even though it has lower floors but higher ceilings because if the salesman knows that there's a result here that ends with you just walking out the door, that motivates them to put the best deal on the table. They have to believe it though, but they have to believe it. Like I could walk into the car dealership and be like, I'm going to leave. And they're like, where are you going? Right. And so, and
as you're counting your money and putting it out on the counter, I'm getting out of here. I'm walking out.
Well, I'm sitting there at the car dealership and my car's broken down and they know I have to Uber home unless I buy a car. Well, I'm going to have some like less negotiating power. If I just drove in and said, I'll just walk across the street, and I don't care what kind of car I have. Well, now I have insane leverage and buying power here. So I think thinking about Marks from that point of view is very pro Marks. And I'm sure people will think that it's like us just sort of like figuring out ways to compliment him. But I don't know. I do think there's something to it when it comes to negotiations.
And the other part of this too is, so I don't know, maybe we'll get to the D'Angelo Russell today. Maybe we won't. We'll see where this goes, because the other part of it that I think that brings more patience now than ever before is the fact that the Brooklyn Nets already have so many effing picks for so many years that if you told me that Cam Johnson just played out his contract for the Brooklyn Nets and they never got anything for him, yes, I would paint 1,000 scenarios where, listen, you really should have moved him here or some team really came calling. And again, we're talking about 25% chance that he's here through the deadline. So we're also talking about a 75+% chance that he's gone, that they do make the deal. But I think that also can influence you, right? So if you're Sean Marks and you, as you say, teams start calling, we go, yeah, I have 4 first-round picks in 2025. I've got another one in 2026. I've got 3 more in 27. I've got 3 more in 28. I've got 2 more in 29, right? Like you've built up such a stockpile that while you still want value for the player in Cam Johnson, that I wouldn't be shocked if that's a part of Sean Marks' thinking is, yes, I can get more for him and I can stockpile. And having him in the future is great. And we've talked about it extensively. Like, it never hurts to be able to roll over your assets and continue to build out for yourself for the future, because you may want to spend these on a superstar at some point. But the other side of it is, again, that having a player of talent, of value, also represents something for what you want to accomplish over the next year and a half, 2 years. So I just think that if you were sitting here with a bare cupboard, yeah, it would feel different. But we saw him walk through that with Mikal Bridges, and that's part of how we got to this place where he has as many picks as he does. I want to ask something about D'Angelo. Does that ring true to you? Like, having this haul of assets makes it a lot easier to hold lines that you want around particular players?
I think having a whole, yes, I agree, because when you have a lot, you don't have to go begging for more. Right. So I think that's point one. And two, just saying, hey, look, we have to meet a salary floor too. Like, we got this guy on a good contract. He'll be tradable next year. Right. Like, it gives us more options. Like, the story that we told at the beginning, or that you told at the beginning, about like getting a superstar, that's something you can just go tell other GMs too, and just say, well, look, the only way we're going to trade him is if it's the most you can possibly give. Because if you don't, we'll save him and we'll give the most we can possibly give to get Giannis next year or something like that. And like, you can just say, does that make sense? I think you can, the other, like, sort of the dealership story is, like I said, if you tell a dealer, it's like, well, I can just walk across. I don't care what kind of car I get. I just want it to be nice. And I want it to be over $55,000. And guess what? There's 16 dealerships on this row. Let's go to the next one. And if they know you're going to do that, then and the other team needs a guy like this. Like, if you're OKC and you're like, hey, we can win the championship if we get this guy, or right. Or it's like,
right.
Or,
I mean, like, yeah, or seismic shifts in your expectations, or taking you from 30% chance you think you win the championship to 50, like,
or even
in terms of
other stories, like maybe De'Aaron Fox doesn't ask out if they get another guy like this in Sacramento. Yes. Like, maybe they're not championship guys. Exactly. They're not championship caliber, but they keep their team relevant because, like, they're one of their best players. It doesn't want to ask out. But there's lots of other stories. Other teams just have more incentive to go all the way here. And then they're all bidding against each other too. So I just think there's like it's the other teams bidding against each other, actually, where I think the number, I would drive my percentage higher that he does get traded, because I will think someone's going to come with the big thing. Right. And so anyway, long story short, there's just more happening here than I think we painted a picture. I hope we painted a picture that there's more than just happening than Nets should just trade Cam Johnson. Right. Like, there's considerably more happening here, I think, than just that very easy type those words into the keyboard and like hit send. Like, I think that the story seems deeper.
Maybe coming up here in a second, we'll get to D'Angelo Russell, or maybe I'll have another thought about Cam Johnson and potentially what the market does look like when Doug mentions desperate teams versus teams that feel like they're set. Let's go ahead and talk about that to close things out in just one moment.
All right, basketball season's heating up. No better way to get real money action while watching your favorite NBA stars than with PrizePicks. Maybe you're a diehard fan. Maybe you just love some friendly competition. PrizePicks makes it fun and easy to turn your basketball knowledge into cash. It's so easy how this works. You just go more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yeah, you think LeBron's going to drop 30 points? Maybe you go more. Maybe you think Luka, well, no, Luka's hurt right now. Maybe you think Jalen Brunson's going to get fewer than 8 assists or less than 8 assists. PrizePicks lets you make your predictions, put your money where your mouth is in just 60 seconds. They got a couple other ones I got up here. They got Paul George, more or less than 4.5 assists. And then old Fred Tage Thompson from yesterday's read, hockey player. I found this one. This guy's a hockey player. You can go time on ice. Well, I'm only highlighting this because PrizePicks has time on ice. That's awesome. Like, what an awesome stat.
And that checks out being a hockey player.
Exactly. What a cool thing to root. Honestly, what a cool thing to root for. Like, when you're just watching hockey, you can make your picks in as quick as 15 minutes. You get your payment in as quick as 15 minutes. You can make your picks in just a few seconds. It's the perfect time to join. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. No need to win to get the bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game.
All right, as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, I do have to touch back here for a second. There's another question I do want to ask about Cam Johnson. So maybe D'Angelo will have to wait for one more day. The Nets are going to take on the Knicks, obviously, tonight, and we'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode. But back at the top, people, if you have followed us all the way back to the previous iteration of this show, when we were just two guys talking primarily to ourselves. The intros of shows used to involve some completely random quip. And when I talked about having combed my hair, it cast my mind back to simpler times, Doug. And it's just a memory that I want to share with the world.
What do we like start the episode? I don't even remember. What would we do?
I think that it really was as loosely connected to basketball or the Nets as possible, and then we would do the show. So, I comb my hair, Doug continues to be bald, and the Brooklyn Nets play, And I don't ask.
Really? I got such a bad memory for stuff like that. I would never even been able to think about that. I wonder, can you even still get these episodes? Anyway, whatever. Okay, let's.
Anyway, point being. So there's this thing about D'Angelo Russell that I find interesting when we talk about veterans and experienced players, and he is that, right? So having him on the roster now, I think, is important for the team. I am curious about the contract expiring. He's going to go contract hunting. The fact that it's expiring, should the Nets be willing to maybe trade him? I've maybe moved a little bit on having a short list of teams that I actually think could use a backup point guard to run their second unit. I doubt the Nets move him. But rather than talk about that, let's talk about how on Friday, when I was doing a solo show, I started thinking about other teams. And when you mentioned last segment about which teams are desperate, so we talk about OKC. Do they need to trade for Cam Johnson? Like, is he the missing piece for them? Does he put them exponentially over the top? I tried to think about like a team that is desperate, and I brought up Cleveland. And everyone kind of said, well, they only have the 2031 first round pick. How could they possibly make this happen? But then I started hearing from Danny Cunningham, who's on Locked On Cavs, and other people around the Cleveland organization saying, listen, you want to talk about things that make the money work, obviously the Karis LeVert, etc. But Okoro's name has at least been thrown into the conversation as being a compiler, along with Tyson, along with another, I'm trying to remember what the other name was here. Niang, which doesn't matter. That's just money filler. But if you had a first-round pick and 2 or 3 threes and Okoro and Tyson, who's a former 20th overall pick, first-round pick, I just found it interesting that you can get to a place where player value, especially if you're hearing other teams are not going to give you their best young player in a deal for Cam Johnson. I found it interesting enough to want to hear if you thought like frameworks like that, where it's only one first-round pick, but it's multiple young players under the age of 23, former first-round picks that have real value for the Nets potentially going forward on the court or in trades.
It doesn't really interest me at this point. I think there was a time when I think could have like talked myself into Okoro more as like,
and that's interesting too, right? Like where Okoro is in the perception of his value now.
That was more because there was a time when we advocated for a trade like that, but it wasn't around setting out like a really positive asset. It was more like, hey, you're like, we're going to swap. We're going to take like a post hype ish kind of guy, try to rehabilitate him. But they re-signed him, and then that's just past that mode now, like with the guys like this. So I don't think like that deal does not represent.
Still just 23.
Like, what's that?
He's still just 23 years
old.
old.
But he just hasn't done enough. And I just think when Cam Johnson going out the door, it just has to be someone better. I think it has more to do with Cam Johnson than it has to do with Okoro. I'll put it that way. It's like it's Cam Johnson's too good to think that this guy could be like a major piece in a trade. Yeah. Like I think that's really what it is. Where it's like, I even said about the same thing about like Wiggins.
Here's the question. Here's the way to frame. I'll ask this: what percentage would you put on Isaac Okoro holding first-round pick value in a trade over the life of his current contract?
0. Like,
okay, so that matters, right? So it's like, you're trading him, but the former 5th overall pick, a few years ago, if you think he could be a first-round value down the line, then that equates into it. But if you think at best he'd be a contributor to your team and probably play it out and not be back, whatever, then that does change it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think like, I just think that's just that. Yeah. When I hear trades like this, I'm like, if I'm Marks and that's the only trade I hold. Like, right. I think
that's a good way to frame it too, right? Like, yeah, this is the best thing coming through right now. How do we feel?
That's the only one I hold. Because the story we told about Cam Johnson being a good person to have on the team still is fine enough to stick.
And I'll tell you right now that if Cleveland had, because they have 2030 and 2031, but they can't give up back-to-back draft picks and not have that balance. If Cleveland had one more, if they had another pick, Cleveland is the desperate team to me, as good as their record is right now. When you look at Boston, they're challenging. I was just talking with John Corrales yesterday, where it's, well, that the Boston Celtics take almost 7 or 8 more threes than any other team. Guess what? The 5th highest 3-point taking team is the Cleveland Cavs. The number 1 3-point hitting team is the Cleveland Cavs. And they have other ways to beat you. But to me, it's like for a team that hasn't gotten over that hump yet, who stayed committed to Donovan Mitchell, oh God, we'd love to just kind of splash the pot over the top. Now, some people would argue, yeah, but the team's already playing so well and you have nice balance. Like, why mess with it? But even the Kings, as you mentioned in the last segment too, it's like, I think these desperate teams, and I don't know if OKC to that dream kind of partner with all their assets, I don't know if they're desperate. Like, I look at them coming off last season as well and go, they probably feel pretty good about themselves. They probably don't feel like they need to do something at that level. Whereas desperate teams, that's kind of what you're hoping for here. And we've heard some rumors about whether or not the willingness or the buzz or the number, like if there would be some cooling off here. So it all goes hand in hand, right? Sean Marks says, maybe I'm willing to hold through the deadline. Maybe some teams are saying we don't really need them. And then you get down to it and everybody still comes in with their offers, whether or not they're as big as we think they would be. I
think it's still just OKC. I think OKC looks at this and they're like, we're 35-7, right? Like, geez, that's so good. 35-7 shooting.
Cleveland. It's insane.
And they're 18th in 3-point percentage, right? Like, they're killing everybody and they're below average in 3-point percentage. And you're like, oh, they have an MVP candidate right now who could win. And they kind of just don't have this like three that can hit threes, right? Like they have the MVP. They have two bigs that can probably end up playing together if they can get healthy and play separately and be awesome. They have the four. They're kind of stuck a little bit. They have Caruso that they can play defensively off the bench. He's still kind of ramping up minutes. If he'll probably end up closing with them when the leverage is highest. And you just add a guy who's a sniper from 3-point land, like from beyond the arc, and like that's kind of it. And so that's the kind of team. And the West is kind of looking shaky, right? It's like, I don't know. They're 7 games. They basically already locked into the 1 seed. The Rockets, they're gonna have to make them. Rockets are an interesting team too because they're another one that can't really hit threes. Grizzlies can't stay healthy. Nuggets, it's like Nuggets or Jokic or bust. And then after that, it just kind of drops off. Like, unless you just think like the Cavs or the Mavs can get Luka healthy and they can kind of go back to where they were, right? Yeah. So it's just like there's not a lot of quality, like championship level teams in that group. And so I think OKC, if they're just like, I'm not that they would have an easy path to the finals, but like Boston and Cleveland are headed for, to hit each other here. And the Knicks are going to be tough it could be a tough out depending on it, right? And so maybe I'm underselling the West, but I just think OKC, it's like, this is just the guy. This is the guy. Like, this is exactly what we need. And we would just be in the finals. I don't know. That's how I see
and it's funny because I think talking about Houston maybe at some point as well as a trade partner would be interesting. But this probably is, just to go back to the top. Oh, the Nets are willing to hold them through the deadline. And then we have heard like, oh, maybe some teams are cooling off a little bit on being in on it. Maybe it is that perception. Well, if OKC says they want them, what am I even going to bother going to the table for? They got all the picks. They got young players. Like, what offer am I making, or how hard am I going to have to swing? And even if you get them, if you're the Kings and we go when we get them, we might, now that's a different one. Maybe we save Fox from leaving. Maybe we, keep our band together here. But the other side of it is we give up a ton. And what's the end game? We go out in the second round of the playoffs. So, I think there is something about that too, that these teams are going to do equations on. But the Houston one's interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that. Obviously, after we see how the Nets fare, as Doug mentioned, 11-point dogs to the New York Knicks.
Oh, come on. They were so good against the spread this whole year, but that's kind of tailed off a little bit. All right, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets where you listen. YouTube, subscribe, getting toward 8,000 subscribers. Let's get there this season. Let's get there, please. And then make sure you just listen to wherever you listen to or subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. It's all free for you, and it's the number one way to help the show.
Nature gives to every time and season some beauties of its own. And from morning to night, as from the candle to the cradle to the grave, oh, I blew it, Doug, but I'm going to power through. Don't worry about me. It is but a succession of changes so gentle and easy that we can scarcely mark their progress. Oh, boy. Guys, let's just live in it. I'm just going to label it as Adam Armbrecht, not one of the.
Who was it? Who was that from? Who was it?
It was Charles Dickens. And if I had really stuck the landing, I think we all would have had a nice. It would have been nice, like the rhythm, the cadence, the flow.
I gotta say,
it means nothing. It all means nothing in the end.
That was awful. Like,
I know, it was terrible.
I always want to give you. I want to give you. Leave it in so we learn from our mistakes. But God, that was bad.
Yeah.
Just in case anyone's wondering, I'm going to speak to Adam off the air about that. That was pretty bad. Okay. One of the all-time great poets. Obviously, we'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
We try our best. We try to do better.